Okay, welcome to Cafe Radio. We're going to be talking about Cuba today and what you need to know. I always wanted to go to Havana, and I had a more difficult time convincing my wife. So what I did is I tracked down a restaurant, a Havana restaurant. It's called the Havana Grill in San Diego. And I said, let's go there. Maybe there's a Cuban manager or an owner or somebody we can talk to that'll make her feel better about going to Cuba. And so I got in touch with the owner, and we emailed back and forth a little bit, and finally got in touch with this wonderful woman that you're looking at right here, Sandra Caudette. She is the owner of the Havana Grill in San Diego. And so we made an appointment to come in and speak to her. And we'd already been to the restaurant several times. It's now our favorite place, favorite food, favorite place, favorite music. But we finally got a hold of her and we nailed down an appointment, and I brought my wife in and we sat down thinking she was going to convince my wife to go to Cuba, that it was safe, that it was okay. And your message, Sandra, is sure, you can go visit Cuba, but you should know about Cuba. And the fascinating conversation that happened with you and us that took about an hour really just blew our minds, because we didn't get any travel brochure, like I said, from you. What we got was an in-depth view from someone who lived there, grew up there, or was born there, and your family is from there. And on that note, Sandra, welcome, and let's get right into it. Let's get started. Tell us about Cuba. Tell me what the daily life is like for the most Cubans. Let's start there.
Well, first on, thank you really very much for that introduction, and thank you for having me. You know, this is a subject that I love to talk about because there's just a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding about Cuba and misinformation about Cuba. And we have to remember that Cuba has a political machine, a propaganda machine that puts out information that's favorable to the regime. They're not going to tell you anything that's unfavorable. They're certainly not going to tell it to their citizens, and they're never going to say anything that's unfavorable to the outside world. So a lot of times people don't know that they're being bombarded with communist propaganda, when in fact, that's what it is. If you go to Cuba today, you're going to see, if you go as a tourist, you're going to see only those things that the government wants you to see. They're not going to show you anything that is unpleasant. So it's almost like going to a fairyland in a way. Inside Havana is where they really keep most of the order, because most tourists don't take the time to drive the whole island. They don't go into the interiors and into the small towns. I wish they did, because that's when you would really get a flavor of what's really going on. Life in Cuba is very, very, very difficult for its citizens. People assume that, you know, they come to my restaurant and they taste the wonderful food there, and they make comments to me like, gosh, I want to go to Cuba and have food like this. This food is great, and the music is so great, and the cha-cha-cha and the mambo. Well, and I break it to them, Cubans don't get to eat like this. This is food from Cuba's golden age, from the time of my parents and from when I was a child. Cubans don't get beef today. Beef is illegal for a Cuban. Everything is contraband and everything is illegal. And I know that sounds outrageous, but if you ask a Cuban about the things that are illegal in Cuba, they're going to say everything. Everything's illegal in Cuba, because it is. Everything that they do in their daily lives is considered illegal. And let me just put it to you in a nutshell. In order for a Cuban to survive and feed their family, they have to engage in nefarious activity that to us would not be terribly illegal, but to them It's perfectly all right. It is what's necessary. Of course, I don't want to say it would be unethical, it would be petty theft here. But in Cuba, everyone works for the government. It's a centralized market where there is no free enterprise. Everyone works for the government. So when you walk into a restaurant in Cuba, that restaurant is not owned by an individual. That restaurant is owned by the government. Okay. And they have these things called paladares, where a person in their home, if you want to make a chicken dinner, how are you going to get the chicken if the chicken isn't available to you? You're going to find someone who has a chicken to sell that can sell you in exchange for maybe some cigars that you appropriated from the factory where you work or where your husband works. And so you're going to do a barter. You're both stealing. You're both stealing. The person who's selling you the chicken is not allowed to sell anything. They're breaking the law. So this is an illegal transaction. The chicken is contraband. The cigars are contraband. Coffee is contraband. Meat is contraband. Everything that we take for granted here is contraband and illegal in Cuba. So just assembling the ingredients for a meal in Cuba is such a monumental effort. And I've seen it with my own eyes, because we were guests of some very well-known doctors in Cuba when we were there, and the doctors trying to impress us with a great meal, what they had to go through to just assemble the ingredients that were necessary for one item of that meal. She spent the entire day, the doctor spent all day long looking for all of the ingredients that were needed for just one item of the meal. So there was nothing else served but one item, which here we would consider an hors d'oeuvre or a side dish, but everything in Cuba is difficult. It's not a matter of waiting in lines like you would see in the Soviet Union, waiting in lines. It's a matter of, even if you get into one of the government stores where the food is rationed, everybody has a ration card. And so the food is rationed in Cuba, and you might have the ability to get 2 eggs from the state that month, or a liter of milk for the whole month for the whole family. But even if you can get into a store, they won't have it. They won't have anything. Even if you've been allocated that through your ration card, they don't have it. So there's no soap, there's no toothpaste, let alone perfume or lipstick. Forget about those things. But as far as the everyday life of a Cuban in Cuba, it is almost an impossible way to live. And nobody here, none of us could live that way. I'll tell you that. You have to be born and raised in that system to understand how to maneuver in that system. So since everybody's stealing in order to feed their families, stealing has become okay. It's the norm, and they don't even call it stealing. They gave it a new name. They call it resolver. Okay, we've got a problem here. We need some eggs. We have to resolve this problem, and we're going to go get some eggs. So we're going to resolve the eggs. That's what they don't say. I'm going to go steal some eggs. I got to figure out where to find some eggs for today or tomorrow if I want to make an omelet or a cake. Forget getting butter. Butter is unknown. So even if you have a little farm and you have a cow and you have some chickens, those chickens and those cows do not belong to you. They belong to the state. So when people talk about communism and they throw this word about socialism, they don't have a clue. Most people don't have a clue about what socialism is or what communism is. Socialism is supposed to be like a limbo state, a transitionary state between democracy and communism. But in fact, in Cuba, it's not socialism, it's pure communism. No Cuban has ever voted. There is no free election in Cuba. There are no free elections. Everyone is a slave of the state, and you better get used to it. And you better not say anything, because whatever you say means you could go to jail, your whole family can go to jail. So they keep the entire population oppressed. Everyone is an oppressed person in Cuba.
Now,
That's why
you said in a talk, Sandra, that I heard, excuse me for interrupting, but you said in a talk that each block or neighborhood had an assigned person,
yes,
and you said they are called the president.
they call them the president of the CDR, which stands for the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución. It means the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. It's a government organization. And every block installs someone who is the watcher for that block. And they call that person the president of the CDR. That's the president. They give him a fancy title, and everybody watches out because the president is watching everything that's happening. And that means everything that comes in and out of your home, Don. Talk about hell in a small town. I mean, everything and everyone who comes in and out of your home is a suspect. Everyone. If your family in the United States sends you $300 to buy a TV, okay? Let's say you take that TV, that $300. Of course, it's not $300 by the time you get it, because the conversion rate is exorbitant, and the government keeps a whole lot of that money. I think it's like 25% that they keep. So let's say after you convert the money, you go to one of the government stores and you're able to buy one of those TVs. You're going to be very, very careful bringing it into your home, because they're watching you. Because the whole point of communism is turning neighbor against neighbor. Everyone is watching you because they all work for the state. Communism is one for all and all for one, and supposedly. How did you get that TV, Don? Where did you get the money to get that TV? You're not supposed to have that TV because I don't have one like it. So that is how they keep control. As one of the methods that they use to keep control of the people is because your neighbors can be snitching on you to the president of the CDR. And that includes everything. If you bring a bag of groceries home, they're watching you. And I mean, we just think this is impossible. How can this be possible? It would be outrageous here that a neighbor would turn you in because they're watching you, what you're bringing home. Here we say it's nobody's business. Over there, it's everybody's business. And it's a whole turnaround of the way we think about things, because so many things in Cuba are upside down.
Does anybody have any money over there?
People really normally don't have money. A normal pension in it is anywhere from $9.50 a month to about $12 or $13 a month. If you have been a nurse your entire life, 50 years, and I'm telling you this from direct knowledge, and you retire after a 50-year service working for the government, which is everybody, your pension is $12 a month. Okay, now, yeah, you get $12 a month, the equivalent of $12, but what can you buy with $12? If you actually want to buy with meat, something that, let's say meat in one of the government stores, you could end up paying $4 or $5 for a little bit of meat to feed your family. Half of your pension is gone for one meal. So it doesn't correlate to anything that we think is logical. It's not logical.
And where does that meat come from?
The government farms. All of the meat comes from the government. All of the foodstuffs come from the government. That's what's so strange about the whole thing. Because we're so used to living in liberty and with a capitalist system, it's just not even palatable. We can't even imagine this. How could anybody live like this? But they do, and they've
Now
gotten used to it.
you showed some photos of what used to be beautiful neighborhoods in the 50s, and they're just all falling apart today. They're just
Crumbling,
completely crumbling and run down.
crumbling,
Nobody
absolutely crumbling.
nobody has money for paint, supplies. There's just none of that going on. And then we get to see on occasional photos of some nice cars in Havana from maybe the 50s or 60s.
Right. Everybody thinks they're so cute. They're so quaint. They're so valuable. They're so wonderful. Well, when I see those old cars, they just bring me sadness, because they have had to maintain those cars. They make their own parts. They can't go to General Motors and get the parts for their cars. They make those parts. The industriousness of the Cuban people is absolutely incredible, because you don't have a carburetor, you need a carburetor, somebody will make that carburetor for you. Somebody will make the brakes and the brake pads and whatever it is that they need, they will make. So when you see those pictures of those crumbling neighborhoods, the reason they're crumbling is because there's nothing with which to fix up anything. There are no nails, there's no glue, there certainly isn't any drywall, there's no plaster, there's no wire, there's no paint. It's impossible. The buildings that have been restored are in Havana, and they've been restored in order to keep tourism active. But if the Cuban government actually wanted to improve the conditions for the people, this would have been gone ages ago. They do not want the people to get ahead. Anytime, Don, that the people try to lift up the economy by their industry, let's just talk about what do you call it, crafts, like folk crafts, that people painting, sculptures. As soon as somebody starts lifting up and making money and selling things to the tourists, they just shoot them down. They shoot them down. The government does not want free enterprise of any sort in among the people. They want to keep the people depressed and oppressed. That's their whole point, to keep the people down. Because when you have a people who are looking for food every day, that's all they care about, is looking for food to feed themselves and their families.
Do you remember better days in Cuba, or your family, or
I remember
when was that?
I remember a lot, because I was 6 years old when we moved to the United States, because my parents knew that there was trouble afoot, trouble brewing in Cuba. And so my parents said, well, let's just get out of here and we'll go back after this blows over. So the fact is that in 1958, there were more Americans living in Cuba than Cubans living in the United States. And people they don't know that. Cuba was a beautiful place, and many Americans moved there. Not only did they vacation there, they moved there permanently, or they had second and third homes in Cuba.
Hemingway being one of the more famous.
One of the famous ones, right? And Cuba was a beautiful place, even in the countryside. I mean, the fact is, it was always a beautiful place. It's a beautiful island. And even though they've tried, they can't quite destroy the natural beauty of the island. But you could drive all over Cuba in the 50s and before, and it was clean, and the people were well dressed, and there was soap and disinfectant and all of the things, and washing machines and stoves and everything that we had here. Remember, the Cuban peso was on the parity with the US dollar. So it was, you would take your dollars down there if you were on vacation, and $1 equaled 1 Cuban peso, and you could buy anything. Anything that was available in the United States was also available in Cuba. Cuba had more newspapers per capita than the United States, more radio stations, more television stations, more, I mean, everything. it was the most advanced country in Latin America. And now it is a third world country. It is the poorest country in Latin America and one of the poorest in the world. That's the success of the Cuban Revolution. They destroyed the country, they destroyed the economy, and they destroyed the culture and the society. That is what they call the triumph of the revolution. It's all lies.
Some protests in the street, what, a month and a half?
People were put in prison.
Is that what happened to him? Because it was large and you were thinking maybe this is the start of something, and then it just went away.
Well, everybody here was on pins and needles. You know, everybody around the world were hoping that something great would happen, but they have nothing. There's no weapons. There's no way to get weapons into Cuba. It's an island. And so, you know, with the airspace patrolled and the waterways patrolled, there's no way to get anything in and out of Cuba. The government knows everything. Those poor people, all they could do was hope for public attention to come their way, international attention.
Well, you were saying during the Vietnam War era that they thought that the citizens of Cuba, residents, thought that the US may come and save them, because after all, they were going halfway around the world to save Vietnam.
Well, remember during the 50s, we had the McCarthy era here in the United States, and there was the Red Threat. There was a tremendous fear that communism would take hold in Southeast Asia or anywhere, and especially in the United States. And, you know, there've been a lot of movies made about the blacklisting of artists and writers and actors and directors here in Hollywood and in other places. But during that time, there was this tremendous fear of communism all over the world after what had happened in Europe with the Soviet Union forming this empire that they formed at Czechoslovakia, Poland, and, you know, Hungary and the rest of the Soviet bloc countries. The Americans had gone to Vietnam, and so to fight communism in Southeast Asia. Okay, so Cubans imagined that there was no way that the United States was going to abandon them. Now, as soon as Castro declared communism and everybody knew what was going on, oh, he wants to put in a Soviet-style dictatorship here. Well, the Americans aren't going to stand for it. So we were pretty sure, everyone was I was a child, but my parents and their friends were pretty sure that the United States would never put up with that. And that's not what happened. The Bay of Pigs was one of the invasion was one of the responses to that. But at the last minute, we all know the story, the United States pulled out and left all of those poor Cuban rebels who had come from Miami to die. They were slaughtered by Castro's forces because there was no backup, there was no cover. So that was a betrayal. That was a big betrayal that the United States made to people that were devoted to who had promised to give up their lives to bring back democracy to Cuba. And in fact, the United States just bailed at the last minute, and hundreds of men were slaughtered. It's a terrible story.
What do you think of today? Are tourists safe in Cuba? Or what do you think of tourists or people should know about Cuba today?
I think everyone should go to Cuba. I never meant to, to tell you not to go to Cuba. I just want people to understand what's going on when they go to Cuba. It is safe. Of course it's safe. Everyone is, nobody has a gun, that's for sure. And if you are caught committing a crime, I mean, it's over. It's over. There's very little crime. Actually, there's very little crime in Cuba because the consequences are so severe for you and your family.
Doctor is what, $20 a month?
About $20 a month.
That is, it's pretty unbelievable. And what do you think of the healthcare system? if I go as a tourist and I get in an accident or I have a heart attack, what's going to happen?
Well, there are no ambulances, so you're not going to be able to get to the hospital. But if you're a tourist, somebody will get you to the tourist hospital. There's a hospital for tourists only. Cubans can't go there. And there in that hospital, they will have medicine for you, and they do have things for only foreigners. So they have equipped a hospital in Havana to take care of foreigners.
And if you're a local, where do you go? What happens?
If you're a local and you're lucky to have somebody take you, because it just goes on and on. There's no fuel. So sometimes somebody might have a car available, but there's no fuel for the car. So if you can find somebody with a car who has fuel in the car, you might be able to get that person to take you to the hospital.
And
People on bicycles to the hospital.
And are you all set once you get there? Is it good health care from that point?
Absolutely not. Yes, the doctor will treat you for free, but there may not be antibiotics. There may not be disinfectant or anesthesia or aspirin or soap. So yes, it's free, but there's nothing there to treat you. Old people who become incontinent, there's no diapers for old people. You know, we see them on television like they're, so popular here. There's no diapers for old people. There's no diapers for babies. So yeah, the healthcare is free, and Cuba has one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world. They actually do, because the prenatal care is so good. You can go and you can talk to a doctor. You can go and you can talk to a nurse at any time, but they don't have anything to give you. All they can tell you is basic health care, and that's why their infant mortality rate is so low, because especially people who don't have a lot of education, those people need help with their prenatal care, and education is most of it.
So even the average family, or even the above average family academically, they still live very poor.
The more educated you are, the poorer you are. It's upside down. The more education you have, the more likelihood that your wages are pegged so low that you can barely survive. So you'll see doctors hitching rides on the way to their hospitals. It's so sad, Don. It's so sad. They'll be standing by the side of the road with everybody else, all dressed in their uniforms, with a little plastic bag where they may have a sandwich for lunch or something. And you'll see them, there's no way to get to the hospital. So sometimes you have to wait at the hospital because the doctor can't get to you.
Tell us about human trafficking. And you were saying, I thought I heard you say that even professional women are forced into prostitution.
If you're a professional and you're highly educated, like I said, you have very little money, because your only source of income is the government. Everyone works for the government. The government pegs your salary at a certain level, and that's it. And that goes for world-known musicians and artists. Everyone works for the government. So if you're highly educated, let's say you're an engineer, or you are a researcher, a scientist, a doctor, a university professor, you might make $15, $20 a month. That's not enough. That's not enough to feed your family. What are you going to do? You've got all this education, but there's no way to capitalize on it. And so a lot of these very educated people turn to prostitution. So it's really the only, excuse me, it's the only country in the world where you can, purchase or rent a young woman who's highly educated, and she's a prostitute. And not only the women do it, the men. I personally know of several men who were college professors and were pimps for their students. The students were the hookers, but they don't call them hookers now anymore. They call them riders, like horsewomen. So they gave them a new name too. They're called jineteras. So they're no longer called prostitutes. They're called jineteras. Of course, I'm not saying that prostitution is legal. It's not. It's frowned upon. However, the money that those tourists bring into Cuba when they do come looking for the services of prostitutes, that money is significant. They're staying in government hotels, they're buying food, they're renting cars, whatever they do, that money is significant, even though prostitution itself is illegal. All of the wealth that comes in from foreign tourists is still a big part of the income that the island receives. The island has also been known to sell those old cars on the international market, for very high dollars. Here's something that you might be very surprised to hear. It's been known for some time that Cuba sells its citizens' blood internationally and blood products. So what they'll do is they'll hold a blood drive. Let's say there's an earthquake in Timbuktu. They go on television and they tell everyone to go and give blood because our friends need blood, and let's show them that the revolution is strong and the Cuban people are kind and devoted. Donate blood. So they have these big blood drives and everybody goes out and gives blood. Guess what they do with the blood? They sell it. They turn it into plasma and other blood products, and they sell it on the international market. And there are records, some of them coming out of Massachusetts Institute of Technology from MIT, who keeps records. In 2019, there was like $20 million in blood products exported from Cuba. In 2020, I think it was 26 million that I read. It's outrageous to sell your blood for profit.
Well, Sandra, this has really been eye-opening. The last thing that I thought of is, do the Cuban people know about the luxurious lifestyle of the Castro children and grandchildren? And are you hopeful of Cuba? And if you could wrap it up in 60 seconds.
First of all, I think a lot of people with social media are aware of the wealthy lifestyles that are lived by the Castro family because they post it on Instagram on their yachts in the Mediterranean, when the Cuban people are starving. And I'm always optimistic. I never thought this would last 60 years, but I am optimistic. And the way to bring down the Cuban government is to flood them with people from all over the world, to talk to the people, to go in there and show them how life is truly in other parts of the world in 2021. So I am hopeful. And the only way to bring down the regime is to open it up to travel and somehow work things out with the Cuban governments and with other governments to bring in people who know democracy and freedom from other parts of the world. That's what's going to bring them down.
Sandra, thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.